one of Queen's best power ballads of all time. It's Save Me from the Game, next on Crown Jewels. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to PLD Project's Crown Jewels. I am your host, PLD, and welcome to our journey through the Queen catalog. This week's song, Save Me. We're going to listen to about 6 different versions of it to figure out which one is the crown jewel, the titular crown jewel, or best version of the song. Try to, as always, give you some notes, some quotes, some history, and we'll see if this song slides into my top 10 Queen songs or Queen-related songs of all time. Let's get going. As I said, written by Brian May, does feature Freddie Mercury on lead and backing vocals, Brian May on acoustic and electric guitars, piano, backing vocals, and synthesizer, John Deacon on the bass guitar, Roger Taylor on drums and backing vocals. Now, this was not released in the U.S. as a single, which is a shame as far as I'm concerned. It was released 6 months before the album dropped in the UK, where it hit number 11, so it was a hit single for the band. It also was a hit single in a couple other territories. In Ireland, it hit number 8, Italy number 10, Germany number 42, Netherlands number 5, Norway number 7, and slid into the top 100 in Japan at number 96. The band did play it live from 1979 to 1982, and then it was dropped, which again surprised me. Was not resurrected for any of the solo tours Brian or Roger did in the 90s. Was not resurrected for the Queen plus Paul Rodgers era. It was resurrected later on in the Queen and Adam Lambert tour era, which makes sense because this is a song that's pretty much up Adam's alley. Also, I have to mention here that Brian actually records a version with Carrie Ellis, who I've mentioned before. Carrie Ellis plays Meat in the We Will Rock You musical, which we'll get to it in the 2000s as well. Carrie Ellis did an album, Brian produced it, Brian recorded with her for a while, went on tour with her a bunch of times as well. And on the Anthems album, he actually recorded a version of Save Me with Carrie Ellis on vocals and him playing as well. He also played it live on that tour. But I'm not going to talk about that now because Anthems is a proper album we are going to cover, so I'll wait until that album to cover the Brian May and Carrie Ellis version and the live version from them as well. All right, I got 2 quotes from Brian May to read you. First off, from the BBC in 1980, talking about Save Me, of course. I wrote it, but there is some bits of Freddie in here. It's unusual that we cooperate on a song, but this is probably the closest we've gotten in recent times. Later on in the studio, he said, I wrote Save Me to cut a long story short. I wrote it about a friend, someone who was going through a bad time, and I imagined myself in their shoes, kind of telling the story. Someone whose relationship is totally fucked up, and how sad that person was. All right, we have 6 versions to talk about, and your miles may vary, but 5 to 6 versions to listen to. Tell you what that means in a second. The ones we're going to talk about, the album version, of course. There is a single version from 1979, which was also put on the Greatest Hits album. There is a live version from Queen Rock Montreal in 1981, from On Fire at the Bowl in 1982, Stockholm, a bootleg version in 1982, and then finally a live in Manchester version from 2015 from the Queen plus Adam Lambert era. Okay, we have 6 versions to talk about, like I said, but when I said 5 to 6 versions to listen to, basically your miles may vary. If you listen to the album version first, I'll have you listen to the single version there as well if you want to. I'm going to make it optional because, quite frankly, the differences are pretty minuscule. I'll talk about the studio album version and the single version after we listen to the album version, but not before. You got to listen to it first. So how are you going to listen? Well, if you look in the show notes below, I have a Google Doc in there where I have provided links to all the different versions on YouTube that I have. So when we get to that part of this podcast, I'll have you pause me, click on the link of the version we're going to listen to and talk about, then you can come back and we will have that discussion. So without any further ado, you can go ahead and pause me, listen to the album version and the single version if you'd like, and then come back and I'll be waiting.
It started off so well.
And there it is. That's an archetype power ballad for me as far as I'm concerned. It starts off beautifully with Freddie and a solo piano there. It's joined by an acoustic guitar and John's lyrical bass, kind of like Sail Away Sweet Sister. He does that in both of Brian's power ballads in this album. He has that nice bass. It doesn't just play those low notes. He kind of travels along, makes his own melody. It's really a beautiful addition, adds such texture to the song and such uniqueness to the song. And of course, you get those crashing power chords and harmonies in the second run through of the chorus that really kind of add that power, that chutzpah that Brian always adds, his big orchestrated guitars. The second verse comes in, you get those drums added to the mix. Of course, that's what the Queen does. I like how they build things. I've mentioned it before. I'll mention it again. You'll be sick of me saying this, but the band has always been known for not wanting to repeat itself. So if it does repeat or go into a different, like a second verse, it'll always do something just a little bit different to make it even more engaging. And this part, that's where they build up. They add some drums to the mix. These are some of Brian's greatest lyrics, I think. I mean, they're very beautiful. That whole like soul for sale or rent. It's just, and the way Freddie sings it, he can sell it even more. But these are some great lyrics from Brian. Really heart-wrenching lyrics. You can tell he's really into this song. He's really into love at this point, I think. At least when he gets writing this song. The chorus is full on this time around, full vocals, full everything at this point. It's amazing how it starts off so slow in piano and just gets to be that big, powerful, full orchestra of voices and music. It's great. Now, one of my favorite sections in this track is the guitar solo. A solo is an acoustic guitar solo. Despite Brian having crashed it a few times with the electric, Brian starts off with this nice acoustic number, lulling you in. He does add some electric orchestrated guitars afterwards in the middle section of it, before going out to this nice little small section. This little "Each night I cry" with Freddie's delivery, so powerful. And then it comes that big chorus at a big moment, and we get a blistering guitar solo from Brian. So it's almost like a tease. There's that teasing guitar solo. Freddie kind of inserts that little delivery, and then Brian comes back with a really blistering kind of big rock solo towards the end. And Freddie has this real emotional moment at the end. It really gets up there. And of course, you end very quietly again with just the piano. It's a beautiful song altogether. One of my favorite Queen ballads of all time. It's a perfect pop Queen ballad for sure, with great piano, great guitar, great bass, great vocals. It's got everything in it, really. It really does have everything. So, as far as the single version goes, if you listen to that, you might even say, well, I didn't even notice anything, because it's hard to notice. It's not a whole lot different. Remember, I mentioned that it was released 6 months before the album, so there was a lot of time in between when they're playing with stuff. The single, it's definitely the same performance. You do hear a little bit of differences here. Freddie's voice is mixed in places a few times. The cymbals get buried in the mix a little bit lower. And then there's a guitar part somewhere about 1:30 in, which is mixed a little bit differently as well. Thank you to Queen Vault actually pointing that out to me. I didn't notice it even at first, but when I listened to it, I could tell. But if you're not looking for it, you might not even be able to tell the difference. So much so that it's on the album. The album versions of the album, the single version was the one that they put on the Greatest Hits CD in the UK. So it's an interesting version. I guess it's interesting to have that alternate version to listen to. But when it comes down to it, if I'm going to rank these tracks, I could say you could put either one on the same level, and if I wasn't looking for it, I probably wouldn't even know. So, all right, next up, we're going to listen to the live era during Freddie's era. Rock Montreal, On Fire at the Bull, and then a special surprise, a little fun one I threw in there. Live in Stockholm, 1982. You listen to all three of those. The 82 one is obviously a bootleg, so you know that I feel like I always want to listen to the official release versions because of the sound quality, etc. But if I'm putting that in there, despite it having two officially released live versions, there's probably a reason. You might only have to listen to the beginning, but we'll get there. Go listen to those three and be back for more.
Save me, save me, save me.
All right, there you have it. Let's start with Rock Montreal from Montreal 1981. I've mentioned this a few times before. This was the last time the band went out on tour as a foursome. Afterwards, they would have a touring keyboardist, and eventually Spike Edney in 1984 would join and keep that until the end of time, at least it seems to be so far. But so this makes it very interesting, especially this track, because it's full of a lot of different instrumental performances. So how they do it is Brian starts the track on piano, meaning that until the second chorus, it's Brian on piano, John on bass, and Roger on drums, which have to lay that basis down for Freddie's vocal. It's kind of fun that way, though, honestly. Eventually, though, when Brian does go to the guitar, leave the piano open, we get to Brian's solo. Freddie goes back to the piano at that point and lays down some piano tracks that fill out the song even more, meaning we get a little bit of that build that we should usually only get during the album. It doesn't really get that build as much during live concerts usually, but because Freddie's not playing the piano at first and there's that piano-less entry, it makes it for a nice, kind of cool addition to the track. And the build is great, by the way. The build is wonderful. Freddie's delivery, immaculate. Immaculate. What's also cool, though, is Roger gets those backing vocals. Now, in the album version, the studio version, They kind of blend together. Roger, Brian, and Freddie's voice all blends together during the chorus. Roger really stands out in backing vocals, and I love that it sounds like a Freddie Roger duet, as it sometimes often does. I've mentioned it before. Brian has a great voice as well, but a lot of times live in concerts, you tend to hear Freddie and Roger. You don't always hear Brian unless you listen specifically for him. But that's okay. That's okay. He definitely adds his parts to it, even if it's a little bit more subtle, as it were. Speaking of subtle, there's not as subtle of a difference between the two solos. Brian has a solo because there's no acoustic guitar solo, and then the orchestration, Brian has to play that on the electric, and then Freddie gets his moment, and then Brian gets another solo after that on the electric. So it's no more like two big solos rather than the subtlety of the first one. But Freddie's voice again when he's singing from the piano, the yes sir moment. I love that moment. You can really hit that note and power through it. It's a great version overall. Moving on to 1982 on Fire at the Bowl, they do have the additional pianist or keyboardist here. This is Morgan Fisher. The arrangement very similar to Rock Montreal, but Freddie doesn't play the piano. Brian gets to play more guitars, especially during the chorus and the verse. I will say the sound mix also isn't as good as Rock Montreal, and that's kind of true for the entire album, I think. The keyboards are fine. It's good. I'm sure it was great to let Freddie be able to walk around more, play around more, and Brian have to jump ship. But to me, it's less interesting that way. To me, it's less interesting, and I've always preferred a pure Queen without anybody else involved. Just my own, miles may vary on that. So it's a good, solid version overall. The vocal performance is great. Not quite as good as Montreal, I think. If I had to choose one, which I do, obviously, Spoiler alert, I'm going to go with Montreal. Okay, so the third version we listened to, or I had you listen to live in Stockholm, 1982, really only had to listen to the beginning, because I love when you get flubs and errors and the band kind of recognizes it. Musicians in general, I kind of like when this happened. It's my own thing. So I wanted to share that moment with you because it's pretty funny. It didn't start off so fucking well, now did it. All right, let's go on to the one last version. We are going to listen to Queen plus Adam Lambert live in Manchester in 2015. Click on that link, come back, and we'll finish this thing out. So let me fix this Now, I get that there are a lot of fans, or at least a lot of Queen fans out there, who aren't a big fan of Adam Lambert or the Adam Lambert era. Some do, some don't. But even if you don't like it, which I could completely understand, I completely validate, you got to admit this is the kind of song that's right up his alley. Adam excels at the power ballads. He excels at pop songs, but really power ballads are my favorite songs that when he sings, like "Who Wants to Live Forever," which we will get to. He does a great version of that as well. This one is no different. He does a great version of "Save Me." I do like the different kind of stylings, the different kind of arrangement that the band does for this. You get Adam to beginning with the a cappella, letting the crowd take over a little bit, getting the crowd involved, as the Queen fans like to do. It does mean, of course, it's a little dangerous in this particular version. He's a little off on the key, but he adjusts right away when the music does start coming in. It really is. It's a dramatic song. It's a dramatic version. Adam's a very dramatic singer, so it works out very well. Obviously, this is a bootleg, and there's no official version release of Queen and Adam doing "Save Me." This is what we got. So the sound quality is not the greatest. This is from a bootleg video, of course. But overall, it's kind of a very interesting song choice for them. It's a very good song choice for them. I kind of wish they did it more. Overall, I do like it. I do like it. All right, now we gotta rate the version to figure out which one is the titular crown jewel. I will tell you, between my top two choices there, it's a very, very difficult choice. But let me give you the bottom choices first before we debate the top two. My least favorite of the bunch, Manchester 2015, the Queen and Adam Lambert version. Now, I know I made a kind of impassioned argument to say that this is a great version. I do think it is a pretty damn good version. However, you also know my argument against bootlegs, and if you are a bootleg version and not professionally recorded version, you're going to have to do a lot in order to put above a really high quality audio version for me. The hiss, the sound in the crowd and everything else when you're struggling to hear, it kind of does its detriment. There's some things that you can have, if you have a really different arrangement that really knocks my socks off, or there's some really amazing performance in there, performance notes, it doesn't it could go over the top of some studio releases or some official released album live versions rather. This one does not quite do that. It is a great vocal, but Freddie's is a great vocal too, so it has that to go to it. Now, having said that, I will say that I almost put Stockholm 1982 over on Fire at the Bull because I just have so much fun listening to that. I put that on all the time because it makes me smile, it makes me laugh. But at the end of the day, the rest of the performance, we're talking about the crown jewel version of Save Me. I might listen to this one a lot just because it makes me laugh. But at the end of the day, it's not quite as good a performance, an audio sound rather, as the other officially released live version. So next up is Stockholm 1982. From there, we have On Fire at the Bull, which I kind of mentioned below that I liked it a little bit least than Rock Montreal. Rock Montreal being more interesting for me, being better mixed for me. So we got that. Manchester 2015, Stockholm 1982, On Fire at the Bull. Now the big difference is Rock Montreal or the album/single version. This was a very, very difficult choice for me. On one hand, on Rock Montreal, I have a great impassioned performance from Freddie. I have the band like improvising kind of ways to make it through the different album versions, having Brian play piano, having Freddie play piano. I have Brian playing some great guitar solo work, the crowd being very much involved. I love it. On the other side of the coin there, the album version, we get that really layered sound, which I really love Queen for. We get that acoustic guitar solo, the subtlety there, which leads into the power blistered chord later on. We get Freddie and John's lyrical bass coming through a little more clear on the studio version. We have Freddie's vocals, which is easily as good as the Rock Montreal. Even gets that one bigger, higher note that he doesn't go for in the Rock Montreal version. It's kind of a more improv-ish kind of note anyway, so it's not like a major part of the melody, but he does have that an oh moment at the end, which is kind of one of my favorite moments of the song. So I guess push comes to shove, I'm going to have to go with the album version for this. Barely. I get if you chose Rock Montreal, I would totally get it and understand. And if you ask me another day, I might change my mind and put Rock Montreal there. That's how good it is. But for as far as this podcast goes, at this episode, at this time, as I'm recording it, I'm going to go with the album version. That's what's going to go on to our ultimate playlist. Alrighty, let's rate the song on a scale of 1 to 11 because we turned everything up to 11 here on PLD Projects. Scale of 1 to 11, I give Save Me a 10.5. Now, you know what that means. It does have a chance to hit my top 10 Queen-related tracks of all time. I have 10 tracks so far on our list. All of them are at 10.5 and higher. So does Save Me enter the list? Yes, it does. I'm going to slide this up the top 10. It's going to hit the number 8 slot. We are sadly pushing Teo Toriate, Let Us Cling Together, from the Day at the Races album, off the top 10. And we are sliding In the Lap of the Gods, Revisited, from Sheer Heart Attack, down to that number 10 slot. And then the tough one, really tough choice here for me, the Prophet Song from A Night at the Opera. I'm going to put that down a little bit. Now, the Prophet Song is a work of genius, a masterpiece. There is something you could say about it meandering just a little bit. I still give it a 10.5 out of 11. So, this is really nitpicking stuff here. Whereas Save Me has a lot of power to it. The only difference is it slides underneath Dragon Attack from the same album. 2 Brian May pen tracks from the game in the top 10. Brian was really on top of his game at this time. Oh, that was bad. I'm sorry. The rest of the list, in case you have forgotten. Number 6 is Don't Stop Me Now from the Jazz album. Bohemian Rhapsody at number 5 at Night of the Opera. I know, right? March of the Black Queen from Queen 2 at number 4. White Queen As It Began from Queen 2 at number 3. It's Late from News of the World at number 2. Number 1 still, Somebody to Love from A Day at the Races. Of course, I'm always going to push you to listen to the Rock Montreal version of that track. That's the crown jewel of Somebody to Love. Great time this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we move on to the last studio track from the game sessions. It's the B-side, A Human Body, which was written and sung by one Raja Taylor. That's it for this week, folks. Thanks for stopping by. Click that like, click that subscribe. Leave me comments, leave 5-star ratings, help me fight this almighty YouTube algorithm, which everyone has been stymied by for sure. If you want to help even further, patreon.com/PLD Projects. Got a great crew there. We got Austin Cadell and Brandon Buckingham. And on the Patreon, you get to listen to Crown Jewels early. Whenever I finish recording it, I put it up almost right away, so you get to do it probably about 3-4 days, and sometimes even a week or two, depending on when I'm able to finish the recordings. So I hope to see you there. All right, folks, we'll see you next week. Until then, of course, save me from something. I don't know. We'll see you next week. Bye.